We'll handle the client meeting, my manager said, sliding my laptop away from me like I was a child who'd been playing with an adult's toy. You're just not senior enough for this one. Megan. The way he smiled when he said it, that patronizing little twitch at the corner of his mouth, made my stomach knot. 5 months of research. 3 weeks of sleepless nights. My vision, my strategy, my slides, and now I was being erased. I nodded and swallowed the familiar lump in my throat as I watched Derek and Lisa, who had contributed exactly nothing to this proposal, walk into the conference room carrying my work under their arms like it was theirs. They didn't even change the footer with my initials. I'm Megan Riley, 34, and before today, I thought I understood how the corporate world worked. Before I continue this story that still makes my hands shake when I tell it, drop a comment where you're watching from and subscribe if you've ever had someone take credit for your work. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. 2 years ago, I joined Vertex Solutions as a senior technical analyst. Not entry-level, not inexperienced. I came with a decade of specialized experience in data infrastructure optimization. The kind of expertise that makes most people's eyes glaze over at dinner parties, but makes companies millions when implemented correctly. It's not sexy work, but it's valuable. At least, the results are. What nobody tells you when you're climbing the corporate ladder is that at a certain point, it stops being about your skills and starts being about who's in what circle. I wasn't in Derek's circle. Derek, our vice president of client services, played golf with our chief executive officer. He wore custom suits and had that silver fox look that made the executive assistants giggle. What Derek didn't have was any actual understanding of technical infrastructure. Not that it stopped him from presenting on it. The $8,200,000 Blackstone account wasn't just another client. It was the client. The one that would put our mid-size firm on the map nationally. The one that would determine bonuses, promotions, and probably a few firings. We'd been chasing Blackstone for years before I arrived, with no success. Until I identified the fundamental flaw in their current system, a subtle, complex inefficiency that was costing them approximately $3,400,000 annually. I found it buried in their operational data, the kind of problem you only spot if you've spent years learning what anomalies to look for. This is good, Megan. Really good. My immediate supervisor, Julia, had said when I first showed her my findings 3 months ago. Let's develop this further before taking it up. I trusted Julia. She was the only female director in our division, the one who'd hired me. She knew what it was like to be underestimated. For 5 months, I lived and breathed the Blackstone proposal. I skipped my sister's birthday weekend. I worked through a stomach flu that had me keeping a trash can under my desk. I developed the entire analysis, built the implementation strategy, created financial projections, and designed a phase-by-phase transition plan that minimized disruption while maximizing savings. Last week, when we got word that Blackstone's entire executive team, including their notoriously hard-to-impress chief technology officer, wanted an in-person presentation, the office erupted. This was it, our shot. Great work, team, Derek announced in our department meeting. Julia and I will finalize the presentation strategy. We need our absolute A-game here. I nodded, waiting for my role to be defined. I'd be presenting the technical sections, obviously. The questions would be complex, specific. They'd need someone who understood the intricacies. But the meeting ended without my name being mentioned. Later that afternoon, Julia stopped by my desk. Her face already told me everything. Derek thinks we should keep the presentation team senior level only, she said quietly. Image thing. You know how it is. But it's my analysis, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. How will they address technical questions? Julia looked uncomfortable. I'll be there to handle those. You've walked me through everything, and I've got your slides. Derek feels strongly about this. And you? How do you feel? I asked. She didn't answer directly, just squeezed my shoulder and said, Your time will come, Megan. This is how the game works. The game. Always the game. The morning of the presentation, I arrived early. Julia had asked me to be on standby in case they needed to call me for a specific question. We both knew it was a token gesture. I watched from my desk as Blackstone's executives arrived. Men in expensive suits, two women in equally expensive attire, all carrying the confidence that comes with decision-making power. Derek greeted them in the lobby with his practiced charm. Julia stood slightly behind, smiling professionally. They disappeared into our largest conference room, the one with glass walls, so everyone could see but not hear what was happening inside. My presentation, all 64 slides of my work, sat printed in leather portfolios with the Vertex logo embossed on them. Not my name, never my name. 10 minutes in, I watched Derek gesturing enthusiastically at my slides. 20 minutes in, Julia was pointing at my technical diagrams. 30 minutes in, I saw the Blackstone Chief Technology Officer, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and a reputation for technical brilliance, leaning forward with interest. And that's when I felt it. Not anger exactly. Something colder, deeper, a clarity. They were presenting my work, but it wasn't complete. I'd made a calculated decision 3 days ago, after being told I wouldn't be in the room. I'd removed the most critical technical specification from the implementation section, the proprietary algorithm that made the entire solution viable. Without it, the proposal was impressive, but ultimately unworkable. Only I knew how to implement it. Only I understood the mathematical complexity behind it. It wasn't documented anywhere else. I'd told myself it was for security reasons, proprietary protection, but sitting there, watching them take credit, I knew the truth. This was my insurance policy. My guarantee that at some point, someone would have to acknowledge that I existed. The algorithm wasn't in the slides, it wasn't in the documentation, it lived only in my head. 40 minutes into the presentation, I saw it happen. The Blackstone Chief Technology Officer was asking a question. Her face looked confused, then concerned. Derek's confident smile faltered. Julia was flipping through papers frantically. Then everyone in the conference room turned their heads in unison, looking out through the glass walls, directly at me. My phone lit up with a text from Julia. Conference room. Now. My heart hammered as I stood up. Coworkers watched curiously as I walked the longest 30 feet of my career. I straightened my blazer, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Ah, here she is, Derek said with a strained smile that didn't reach his eyes. Megan is one of our analysts who helped compile some of the data. Some of the data, not the entire fucking proposal. Some of the data. The Blackstone Chief Technology Officer Sarah Levinson. I now saw from her name placard looked directly at me. Ms. Riley, your colleagues seem unable to explain the specific algorithm that would prevent data corruption during the transition phase. The concept is outlined here. She tapped my slide. But the actual mechanism is unclear. Without it, this entire proposal is theoretically interesting but practically worthless to us. The room went silent. Derek's face flushed red. Julia looked at me with something between plea and panic. This was the moment. The moment I'd been unconsciously planning for without even admitting it to myself. I could save them, or I could be honest. I could play the game, or I could flip the board. I took a seat at the table, directly across from Sarah Levinson. Not at the side, not standing awkwardly by the door. I sat where I belonged, making Derek shift his chair to accommodate me. The algorithm isn't included in the slides, I said calmly, because it's complex enough that it would be meaningless in presentation format. It's a 9-step process combining specialized data verification protocols with a tiered encryption method I developed specifically for Blackstone's infrastructure. Sarah Levinson's eyebrows raised slightly. You developed it? Yes, I said, looking her directly in the eyes. I developed the entire solution you've been reviewing today. You could have heard a pin drop. Derek cleared his throat, about to jump in with damage control. But Sarah Levinson held up her hand, stopping him without even looking in his direction. Perhaps, she said, still holding my gaze, you should walk us through this algorithm, Miss Riley. For the next 20 minutes, I explained the technical core of my solution. I drew diagrams on the whiteboard. I answered increasingly specific questions from Sarah and her technical director. With each answer, I could see recognition in their eyes. They were finally talking to the person who actually understood the problem. Derek and Julia sat in uncomfortable silence. They couldn't contribute. They couldn't even follow parts of the conversation. They'd been exposed, not by any accusation from me, but by their own obvious ignorance of the material they'd been presenting. When I finished explaining, Sarah Levinson leaned back in her chair. "Well," she said, "that clarifies things considerably." She turned to Derek with a coolness that made me want to smile. "Mr. Peterson, I'm curious why Miss Riley wasn't part of this presentation from the beginning, given that she's clearly the architect of the solution." Derek's face contorted into a pained smile. "We value all our team members, but we typically have senior leadership handle client-facing opportunities of this magnitude. Experience has shown." "In my experience," Sarah interrupted, "the people who do the actual work tend to give the most valuable presentations." She turned back to me. "Ms. Riley, if we move forward with Vertex, would you be the implementation lead?" Before Derek could answer for me, I said, "That would be my expectation, yes." I could practically hear Derek's teeth grinding. Sarah nodded, satisfied. "Good. Because I'm not interested in working with figureheads. I need to work with whoever actually understands our systems." The meeting wrapped up shortly after, with handshakes and promises of follow-up discussions. As the Blackstone team left, Sarah Levinson handed me her card. "Not Derek, not Julia, me. Call me directly with any additional thoughts," she said. "I have a few more technical questions when you have time." The conference room door closed behind them, leaving me alone with Derek and Julia. The silence stretched for several seconds. Derek's jaw was tight, a vein pulsing in his forehead. Julia stared at the table, unwilling to meet my eyes. "What the hell was that?" Derek finally hissed. "You deliberately withheld information from the presentation materials?" I met his gaze calmly. I focused on what needed to be in the slides versus what required direct explanation. It was a judgment call. "A judgment call?" His voice rose sharply before he caught himself, glancing at the glass walls. "You made me look like an idiot in there." "I did my job," I replied. "I solved Blackstone's problem. Isn't that what we're paid to do?" Derek slammed his hand on the table. "You think you're clever, don't you? You think this little stunt helps your career?" "I think this little stunt just saved the biggest pitch in company history," I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Would you have preferred I let you fumble through an answer you didn't have?" Julia finally looked up. "Megan, you should have told us about the algorithm beforehand. We could have prepared." The betrayal in her voice, like somehow I was the one who had wronged her, made something snap inside me. "Prepared how, exactly?" I asked, gathering my notes. "By having me write out the explanation so one of you could present it? Or would you have finally let me in the room if you'd known you couldn't do it without me?" Neither answered. They didn't need to. We all knew the truth. I stood up to leave, but Derek blocked my path. "This isn't over, Megan. Not by a long shot." I looked him directly in the eye. "You're right about that." Walking back to my desk felt surreal. Colleagues glanced up with curious expressions. Nobody knew exactly what had happened, but they sensed the shift in atmosphere. Power has a way of changing the air around it. My computer pinged with a calendar invite. An emergency meeting with Human Resources and our Chief Executive Officer, scheduled for afternoon 4:30 p.m. The subject line simply read, "Conduct Review." 3 hours. That's how long it took for Derek to mobilize against me. I wasn't surprised. Wounded egos are dangerous things, especially in men not used to being challenged. But I wasn't the same person who'd walked into that conference room an hour ago. Something had changed, solidified inside me. I spent those 3 hours documenting everything. Every email where I'd updated the team on my progress. Every meeting where my contributions were noted. Every instance where I had specifically developed aspects of the proposal that Derek and Julia later presented as their own. I printed copies and saved digital backups to my personal email. At afternoon 4:28 p.m., I walked into our Chief Executive Officer's office. Richard Barnes was there, along with Derek, Julia, and Vanessa from Human Resources. Richard had built Vertex from nothing 20 years ago. He had a reputation for being tough but fair. I was about to test that reputation. Megan, take a seat, Richard said, his face unreadable. We need to discuss what happened today with Blackstone. I sat down, placing my folder of documentation on the table in front of me. I agree. Derek jumped in immediately. Richard, she deliberately sabotaged the presentation. She withheld critical information to make the rest of us look incompetent. Is that true, Megan? Richard asked. I took a deep breath. What's true is that I developed the entire Blackstone proposal over 5 months. What's true is that 3 days ago, I was told I wasn't senior enough to present my own work. What's true is that the algorithm in question is complex enough that it couldn't be adequately explained in slide format. It needed direct explanation from the person who developed it. Derek started, but Richard held up his hand. Let her finish. I opened my folder. I have here every email, every meeting note, every draft that shows my role as the primary architect of the Blackstone proposal. I also have documentation showing that neither Derek nor Julia contributed substantively to the technical solution or strategic approach. They were presenting work they couldn't explain because they didn't create it. Vanessa from Human Resources looked uncomfortable. Julia stared at her hands. Derek's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Are you threatening us? Derek demanded. I'm establishing facts, I replied calmly. The fact is, I found Blackstone's inefficiency. I developed the solution. I created the implementation plan. And today, I saved the presentation when the questions got too technical for either of you to answer. Richard leaned back in his chair, studying me with new interest. Why didn't you include the algorithm in the slides, Megan? Let's be honest here. The room went quiet. This was the moment of truth. Because I knew if I did, you would never know what happened in that room, I said quietly. Because after months of being overlooked and underestimated, I needed leverage. I needed proof that my contribution mattered. Was it calculated? Yes. Was it wrong? I don't think so. No one was harmed. In fact, the client was impressed enough that I'm confident we'll get the contract. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. That's quite an admission. It's the truth, I said. I'm not interested in playing games anymore. Derek saw his opening. See? She admits she manipulated the situation. This is grounds for immediate termination, Richard. We can't have employees who deliberately undermine leadership. Richard held up his hand again, looking at Vanessa. Has Sarah Levinson from Blackstone reached out since the meeting? Vanessa nodded, looking uncomfortable. Yes. She sent an email about an hour ago. She was very impressed with the proposal, particularly, she glanced at me, with Ms. Riley's technical expertise. She specifically requested that Megan be the primary contact for all implementation discussions going forward. Derek's mouth opened, then closed. Richard turned back to me. So Blackstone wants you specifically? Yes. And you believe you can deliver what you promised them? Absolutely. Richard nodded slowly, then turned to Derek and Julia. Leave us, please. I need to speak with Megan alone. The look of shocked betrayal on Derek's face almost made the whole ordeal worth it. Almost. He stood up, straightening his jacket with affected dignity. Richard, I strongly advise. Thank you, Derek. Richard cut him off. We'll discuss this further tomorrow. After they left, with Vanessa following behind, Richard studied me for a long moment. That was a dangerous game you played today, he finally said. It wasn't a game to me, I replied. It was my career. He nodded slightly. Fair enough, but you understand that intentionally withholding information, regardless of the outcome, raises concerns. I understand that taking credit for others' work also raises concerns, I countered, as does systematic exclusion of qualified team members based on arbitrary hierarchies rather than actual expertise. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. You're not backing down, are you? No, I said simply. I'm not. He leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen, Megan. You're going to lead the Blackstone implementation because, frankly, we don't have a choice. Sarah Levinson made that clear. You'll report directly to me on this project, not through Derek. If you deliver what you promised, If you bring in that $8,200,000 contract and execute it successfully, then we'll revisit your position in the company. I nodded, processing his words. And if I don't deliver? Then this conversation becomes very different. His tone made the implication clear. Understood, I said. As I stood to leave, Richard added, "One more thing, Megan. The technical details you developed, the algorithm. Is it documented anywhere now?" I smiled slightly. "It will be by tomorrow morning." "Good," he said. "Because while I admire your strategic thinking, I don't appreciate being vulnerable to individual leverage. Don't make that play again." "No need," I replied. "Once is enough if people are paying attention." The next 2 weeks were a strange mix of victory and isolation. Word had spread through the office about what happened, though the details varied depending on who was telling the story. Derek avoided me entirely. Julia attempted an awkward apology over coffee that felt more like damage control than genuine remorse. "I just want you to know, I fought for you to be in that meeting," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "But not hard enough," I replied. She flinched. "It's complicated, Megan. You know how it is." "I'm starting to understand exactly how it is," I said, getting up to leave. "That's the problem." The only person who treated me normally was Raj from the development team, who stopped by my desk the day after the confrontation and simply said, "About time someone called their bluff. Need any help with the Blackstone specs?" Raj became my unofficial ally as I prepared for the follow-up meeting with Blackstone. We worked late, refining the technical specifications, building out implementation timelines. I documented everything meticulously. No more leverage plays, as promised to Richard. 1 week after the initial presentation, Sarah Levinson requested a video call with me. Not with Derek, not with Julia, just me. "Ms. Riley," she said when the call connected, "I've reviewed your additional documentation. It's impressive work." "Thank you," I replied. "And please, call me Megan." She nodded. "Megan, then. I'll be direct. Blackstone is prepared to move forward with Vertex on this project, but we have some conditions." "I'm listening." "First, we want you contractually designated as the project lead, not just internally, but in our formal agreement. Second, we want quarterly technical reviews directly with you throughout the implementation. And third," she paused, "we want the right to take you with us if we're not satisfied with Vertex's support structure around your solution." My heart pounded. "Take me with you?" "To be blunt, we're impressed with your capabilities, but less impressed with how your company managed them. The solution you've developed is valuable to us. If Vertex can't properly support your implementation, we'd want the option to hire you directly as a consultant to ensure continuity." I sat back, stunned. This wasn't just leverage. This was a parachute. "That's unusual," I managed. Sarah smiled slightly. "So is finding someone who genuinely understands our infrastructure challenges. I recognize talent, Megan, and I protect my company's interests." After the call, I sat at my desk for a long time, thinking. Then I drafted an email to Richard, outlining Blackstone's conditions. I didn't editorialize or apologize. I simply presented their terms clearly and asked for his response. His reply came within 30 minutes. My office, 3 p.m. When I arrived, Richard wasn't alone. The company's legal counsel, Marcia Winters, was there too. "These terms are highly irregular," Marcia said after introductions. "The clause allowing them to potentially hire you away from us creates significant risk." "For whom?" I asked. Richard's eyebrows raised slightly. "For Vertex, obviously," Marcia replied. "Because I might leave? Or because other clients might make similar requests once they realize where the value actually comes from?" I asked. Richard leaned forward. "What exactly are you saying, Megan?" "I'm saying that Blackstone has recognized something that Vertex hasn't. They see that technical expertise deserves direct client access and proper credit. They're willing to put that in a contract because they value what I bring to the table." I paused. "The question is, does Vertex?" Richard and Marcia exchanged glances. "We value all our employees," Richard began. "Then prove it," I interrupted, surprising even myself with my boldness. Accept Blackstone's terms, and let's discuss what my role at Vertex should really look like going forward. The next 2 hours were the most intense negotiation of my life. By the end, we had reached an agreement. I would remain the designated Blackstone project lead. I would be promoted to technical director, reporting directly to Richard. And this was the part that made Marcia nearly walk out. I would receive a percentage of the Blackstone contract value as a performance bonus. This sets a dangerous precedent, Marcia warned as we finalized the terms. It sets the right precedent, Richard countered, surprising me. We recognize and reward the people who create value. He looked at me with newfound respect. Just make sure you deliver, Megan. I will, I promised. When I left Richard's office, I felt lightheaded. In the span of 2 weeks, I'd gone from being sidelined to securing a promotion, a raise, and a direct line to our chief executive officer. All because I'd finally stopped accepting the unacceptable. The following Monday, Richard called an all-hands meeting to announce the Blackstone contract, all $8,200,000 of it, officially signed. He also announced my promotion to technical director and my role leading the implementation team. I stood near the back, watching Derek's face as Richard praised my innovative solution and technical leadership. His expression was a rigid mask, eyes burning with barely contained rage. Julia clapped politely, a tight smile fixed on her face. After the meeting, as people dispersed, Derek approached me for the first time since our confrontation. "Congratulations," he said, the word like acid on his tongue. "Quite the coup you've pulled off." "It wasn't a coup, Derek," I replied. "It was a correction." He leaned closer, dropping his voice. "Don't get comfortable. This company has a long memory." I smiled, not backing away. "So do I. And unlike some people, I document everything, including this conversation." His eyes widened slightly, and I continued. "My first act as technical director will be reviewing all ongoing projects for proper attribution and credit. I think Richard will find it very interesting to see who's actually doing the work around here versus who's taking credit for it." Derek stepped back, reassessing me like he was seeing me for the first time. "This isn't over," he said, but the threat sounded hollow now. "You're right about that," I agreed. "It's just beginning." 6 months later, I sat across from Sarah Levinson in Blackstone's headquarters, presenting the successful first phase results of our implementation. The projected savings had actually exceeded our estimates by 7%. "I'm impressed, Megan," Sarah said. "Your team has delivered exactly what you promised." My team. The word still felt strange sometimes. After my promotion, I'd built a technical implementation group from scratch, bringing in Raj and 3 other talented analysts who had been similarly overlooked. We worked directly with clients. No figureheads, no filtering of credit. Derek had eventually been reassigned to a special projects role that everyone recognized as a demotion. Julia had made awkward attempts at allyship once my star began rising, but I kept our relationship strictly professional. Some bridges can't be rebuilt once they're burned. As for me, I'd changed too. I spoke up more in meetings. I insisted on proper credit for my team members. I mentored junior women in the company, making sure they knew their worth from the beginning. The day after the successful Blackstone review, Richard called me into his office. "2 more companies have reached out, asking specifically for you and your team," he said, sliding contracts across the desk. "Combined value of approximately $12 million if we land them both." I smiled. "We'll land them." He nodded, studying me. "You know, when you pulled that stunt in the Blackstone meeting, I nearly fired you on the spot." "I know. But then I realized something. You weren't being insubordinate for its own sake. You were fighting to be recognized for your actual value." He leaned back. This company needed that wake-up call. I thought about how my life had changed in 6 months, the respect I'd earned, the team I'd built, the systems I'd helped change. "Not just this company," I said. "I needed it too." That night, I sat on my balcony, looking out at the city lights, thinking about how differently things could have gone, if I'd stayed quiet, if I'd played by the old rules, if I'd accepted being erased. One small decision, to remove that algorithm from the slides, had changed everything. Not because it was calculated or manipulative, but because it forced the truth into the open. Sometimes that's all it takes. One moment of refusing to be invisible. I still have Sarah Levinson's card in my wallet. I never needed to use the escape hatch she offered, but knowing it was there gave me the courage to fight for my place instead of running. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't escaping the system that tried to diminish you. It's transforming it into one that recognizes your true worth. So if you're watching this and you've ever been sidelined, overlooked, or had your work stolen, know that you have more power than you realize. The truth has a way of demanding to be heard. You just have to be brave enough to let it speak. What's your story? Have you ever had to fight to be recognized for your work? Drop a comment below. I want to know I'm not alone in this.